video from zonalaudio.com. Today we are going to be taking an in-depth look at sidechaining. Sidechaining is the cornerstone of a lot of electronic music, and if you can really grasp the concepts and get full control over your sidechaining processes, it is highly likely to improve your mixes significantly. As a mixing and mastering engineer, I see lots of projects from both new and experienced producers where they are using sidechaining to essentially duck sounds out the way of the kick, and this needs very specific dialing in of settings based on your sidechain signal. So we will talk about when best to use a sidechain signal, how that should sound, how you should check it, and we'll also take a look at some more creative sidechaining techniques, not just for kick and bass, but for other drums and pads and synths as well. So this should serve as a really good guide whether you're new to production or very experienced and just want to brush up on some finer details. So we'll be taking a look at some dynamic sidechain processing. If you like this kind of content, please don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the channel, as it massively does help. So let's get into the video. Okay, so to begin to demonstrate some of the controls, I have just got a white noise playing through Operator, and we have a compressor set up ready to sidechain. So the first thing we need to do is to get a sidechain signal. And the most important thing to consider from the off here is the shape or transient or volume of the signal that we're using. So we now have a kick and the white noise. And now what I can do is on our compressor, enable this with sidechain, turn the EQ off, ratio to infinity, and we get that nice pumping sound. So at this point, what really needs to be considered is the settings. Now, this compressor is basically set up to sidechain. If I find this in my Ableton library, this is basically my default settings. Usually when doing compression, I'm reaching for the glue compressor or a third-party compressor. So from a workflow point of view, having this set up to do sidechain compression from the off both saves a lot of time and just means there is no kind of obstacles in my way when writing. Typically, when you open the Ableton compressor, you would be faced with a panel something more similar to this. So you need to open the options here, turn off EQ, turn on sidechain, and then select our sidechain signal, which in this instance is kick audio, and we can use the line here to set the threshold. I personally just prefer this view or this view. And now we need to mention the ratio. I think the default is around 4, and people will set up and just start sidechaining with a ratio of 4. And we still hear the effect, but if we go to infinity, you can hear that increases the strength of the sidechain. So it's very important to note that the ratio when sidechaining is more equivalent to like a dry-wet knob, which we also have here. So we do have essentially 2 dry-wet controls. And often it can be beneficial not to be 100% wet, but a lot of the time you are going to want to do that, especially if we have certain frequencies that are clashing. So a big consideration to make is your ratio. Just to mention the EQ here. So this will actually do a low cut on the sidechain signal. Most of the time, you're not going to want that, but there is certain occasions where that will be helpful. But just to hear and demonstrate this, when the high cut, which essentially means what we are doing on this signal, the kick, on the way into the compressor, we are doing this too. So we're filtering out a lot of the sound. In most use cases, this isn't going to be necessary, but again, worth considering depending on the material that you're working on. So next we have the attack and release times. Now, these are extremely important. These are what will give your sound a groove, a certain energy, a certain feeling, and they are intrinsically linked to the sidechain signal. So when this kick hits, it will activate, and as it gets lower in volume, the sidechain compression will reduce, and we hear that pumping of the sound. Now, if this attack is set all the way up to say 1 second, and our signal is much shorter than that, it's here, and we can see at the bottom, duration 0.29 milliseconds. So under pretty much no circumstances are you going to want a slow attack for your sidechain. Again, there's creative reasons why you might want that, but typically a fast attack is what we want. We want the sidechain compression to act straight away, especially for something like this. Taking it to 0.1 could introduce a little bit of clickiness, so I recommend just giving yourself a tiny bit of time, 0.5 or something like that. And then the release time is really what will give the vibe of the sound. So typically we don't want to be using auto, we want to be dialing in the perfect release time for our signal. So with using the kick directly, and this fairly long kick, it's got quite a full tail, the release is only going to activate when the sound is dying out. So to demonstrate that, and you can hear it's actually getting a little bit distorted when we go too quick on the release. So fast release is definitely going to be beneficial, but now we need to consider what is going on with the sidechain signal, and whatever we do to our kick is then going to reflect in the sidechain settings. So this is why quite often you're better off using a separate sidechain trigger. Now we have other considerations to make at this point. So by the way, these kicks are all from 909 on Heat that you can get from zonalaudio.com now. Some really nice fat 909 kick drums. So I'm actually wanting something a bit bigger for this demonstration. Okay, and a side note, by the way, in your Ableton options, there is an option to have automatic fades. If this is on, you're often just cutting off the initial transient of your kick. So just be aware if you're using samples in this way to not have the transient cut by a fade. Likewise, if you have the option off, you need to make sure you're putting fades on to avoid any clicks, which is definitely beneficial when doing something like this. Probably won't be a click here. Just going to nip it in, duplicate that along. So now have a listen to what happens to the reaction of the sidechain based on these signals. So the volume of the white noise is altered in a different way depending on the signal. So for this reason, we might want to create what you would call a ghost kick or a signal or a dummy. The name is unimportant. What it is a channel that is turned off, which is playing the kick pattern. So I've actually put this into MIDI. I'm just going to do Command Shift M and stick it in on 8th notes. So why have I put it in MIDI? So like I was saying, the reaction of the compressor significantly changes depending on the signal. And with audio, we can edit the sound somewhat, say if we wanted a shorter signal, but then obviously our kick is going to be shorter, and we might want to basically handle our kick independently. So I might set up a sidechain signal that looks something more like this. Okay, a very short, punchy, but still with some high transient. And this is essentially easier to set up and adapt further down the line when in MIDI. So I'm going to turn this up. What a nice, strong, loud signal. Notice at the moment the track is turned off and I'm just in solo, and that will stay turned off. Okay, and now I can shape the sound with the ADSR. which if you're not seeing that, take it off one shot, put it here. And I can set up my sidechain signal like this. So nice, short sidechain. And then we can maintain our original kick with a slightly longer tail. Let's call this. And often I will just kind of gray this out because it is not a track that is making sound. It is just there being a signal doing a job. So I don't want it distracting me too much. So the track is turned off. We have our kick playing, and we will set this to be SC signal. And straight away, we hear that the sidechain isn't working as effectively. However, if I bring down the threshold, okay, and we now have more control because the sidechain signal is so tight and short, the release time is now kind of opened up to us as more of a creative tool. So depending on the vibe you're going for, we can have it a little bit longer here around 200, which gives a kind of nice reverse feel, or we can have it here close to 60, 50, which is a bit more kind of pumping style. Okay, so say I have set up my sidechain signal and I've got my 4/4 kick drum, but maybe at some point I want to do a broken beat. So now we have the broken beat playing and the kick drum or the sidechain signal still playing the 4/4. So again, creative choices to be made here. That could be exactly what you want. Alternatively, you might want the pattern of the kick drum to follow the sidechain. So now I would essentially have to recreate that in MIDI. So this is one reason why I prefer essentially just to keep my kick in MIDI for the most part. So we'll call this one actual MIDI. So I can use the same MIDI signal here. So the same MIDI clip, just playing the 4/4, and then copy this pattern. Okay, so I'm going to mute my kick audio. This is the same kick. Okay, and we have that same pattern, which I kind of jankily copied on the timeline. So I'm just going to select and Command J to consolidate that. And now this is quite easily just dropped onto the sidechain signal. So this will follow the pattern. And again, to demonstrate the control of the release. So there is lots of considerations to take in when setting up your sidechain and how you do it. So we've looked at sidechaining a white noise signal there, which is a good, obvious thing to do. And now I just want to look at taking a rumble and sidechaining that as well. So this is just 2 loops that are forthcoming from our Hard and Groove Techno pack. It's going to be a massive pack with so many amazing resources for groovy and hypnotic techno. There should be a link in the description to sign up for the notification of the release. We'll do a little discount on the first few as well. But yeah, a high rumble and a low rumble just with a little bit of EQ. Okay, so 2 rumbles from sample packs that are already kind of sidechained. They're already sort of ducking out the way on the kicks. Now, that is based on 4/4. So again, when in a non-4/4 pattern, we can essentially do some pretty advanced mixing by just sidechaining. So we're avoiding the low end clashing simply by putting on a compressor and using the sidechain signal. So yeah, sidechaining, really important creative and mixing tool. So this is all very well and good. However, maybe we don't want the full signal getting compressed. So we have the option to only compress the low end. So again, something to bear in mind when you actually decide to do some sidechain compression is the signal that we are using. So I want my sidechain signal to duck the low end. Therefore, the signal has to have some low end in it. Otherwise, the signal isn't appropriate to duck the low end if that low end doesn't exist. So typically we're using a kick. I know lots of people that might use a rim or a clap to get that short, sharp transient, and this can be beneficial. You could even consider setting up two different sidechain signals, one being something that has low end and something that has a sharper transient with less low end, depending on what it is that you're actually sidechaining. So we have the kick, SC signal, so it's nice, got a low body. I'm going to set a low shelf here, and this is Pro Q3 at time of recording. Pro Q4 has recently been released, and this does actually have better controls for the release. So something that I stressed quite a lot in the first overview of the Ableton compressor is how important the release is. Unfortunately, there isn't actually a release time on Pro Q3, but it still allows us to do slightly more creative processing that is going to be very advantageous to the overall sound of our mix. And again, this also indicates the importance of the sidechain trigger. So I mentioned earlier that this is the shape of our kick, and that is intrinsically linked to the sidechain compression settings. So ultimately, although we don't have the release time on Pro Q3, we could adjust our sidechain signal. And again, it could be a case where you want a secondary sidechain signal to do this. So I have been yapping away and not really explained how we set this up. So I'm just going to go back. So typically we won't have the sidechain set. So the first thing we need to do is select that here, and then we make the node dynamic by using the band around the gain knob. So that will set a dynamic EQ. So that basically now means this EQ will act upon the incoming signal, i.e. its own signal. So yeah, basically we may only want to sidechain the low end. So that is now ducking down based on its own signal. But what we can do is, instead of having it automatically looking at its own signal, we can choose here external sidechain, this blue button, and then we see the signal coming in on this meter. So we then have the ability to only compress the low end. That can be even more beneficial for something like an ARP. Okay, so we already have the main compressor there. Let's turn that off for now and look at taking the low end out of this. So we do have some, oh no, there's no effects on here. So there's no pre-EQ at this point. The patch, by the way, is also going to be part of the Hard and Groove Techno pack. Going to add a few serum patches in there as well. This is just a nice techno yard. So it's a nice full-bodied sound, but the low end might be interfering slightly with our kick, in which case, so like these two fundamentals are a little bit strong. So So if we set this again to be low shelf, enable the dynamics, and set the input to be sidechain signal. So that just cleans up the lows and the low mids of that sound and is essentially a more natural way to sidechain. So we're not interfering too much with the highs of something, or the mids and the high mids of something that really should be present in that area. And we're still letting some of the low end through, but just enough to allow the kick and the ARP to sit in the same kind of space without interfering too much with each other, and also gives a little bit more room for the rumble. Okay, so say we have our art playing along nicely and we like that and we want to keep it front and center in the mix, but maybe we want to add another element. Let's go quite simple and grab some kind of vocal hit. So I'm going to go Rave Techno Essentials, again available from zonalaudio.com, and we have some Vox loops. Okay, just going to do a quick little bit of processing here. Okay, and I'm just going to throw in a loop or two, why not? So another good use case for sidechaining is ducking drum loops. And I may even actually want to group all of these together. And a good tip for both workflow and uniformity of sound is to essentially carry around the same compressor like throughout. So I've gone to the white noise. I'm just going to copy that one. Instead of grabbing a new compressor and dialing in all the settings again, just keep using the same one. And typically you're going to want, or it could be quite desirable to have the setting exactly the same on each one so that each sound is pumping in exactly the same way. As it is, I think I will adjust. Actually, no, let's keep it. Cool. So we now have this ARP and vocal existing together. There's certainly no issue mix-wise per se. However, we could, at least in demonstration of this, give the vocal more space by using it as a sidechain signal to duck the ARP out of the way when the vocal plays. So on the sidechain compressor instead of the kick. In fact, let's duplicate that just to make a point that there is often situations in which you might want to sidechain more than once on the same signal. So we're going to choose the signal to be Vox Let's go up from Vox. Okay, it will ignore this one. So we have the vocal kind of jumping in front of the ARP, and we also get a bit more kind of rhythm from the ARP. Just to really exaggerate that. So hopefully you can really hear exactly what that release time is doing now and why we need to be quite careful over the controls. Again, the fastest release here would be So one final use case is I want a pad, again, because I've been working on this a lot. We'll go to the forthcoming groove and hard, synths, pad loops. So for this, I want some automation on the filter frequency. When using Serum or other third parties, I often like just to use the Ableton macros, as we can dial in a little bit more accuracy. So say we have our track moving along, and when the frequency gets to the highest, we want this to start ducking the pad. So again, just a little bit of treatment here, and I will grab my same sidechain compressor, holding down Alt on the keyboard there to do a duplicate, and I need to set the input of this now to be ARP. Okay, so the idea here is essentially for the ARP not to be interfering here when the filter frequency is low. Let's focus on these two sounds and also just have a consideration for keys and scales. This could be wildly out. Okay, so now with our pad and the ARP playing down low, we're not quite getting the result that we want because essentially the volume is the same. So we could automate the threshold. So following this line, we'll just bring down the threshold there. So when the synth is in the highest, if you would consider this kind of a peak moment in the track, it's just going to start jumping in front of the pad. So the pad will still be there, but the ARP will push it back in the mix a little bit. Again, just giving us a bit more kind of space and depth to our track. Let's just finish up a few bits here, put all this into practice and see how it sounds. So I hope you found this tutorial useful, helpful, informative, or enjoyable in some way. If you did, really appreciate it if you could give us a like and support the channel. You can now become a channel member where you'll get additional benefits, discount codes to zonalaudio.com, exclusive member videos. If you have any questions on the processes today, please feel free to ask in the comments. Also, if you are interested in one-to-one music production sessions or attended mixing sessions, there is links in the description to both of those. Until next time, happy producing. Take it easy. Bye.